Welcome everyone. You are signed on to the third webinar in a four-part series. This webinar is steps 5 through 8 of the 8-step lead generating framework, 8-step webinar production framework. The last webinar a few weeks ago, we talked about steps 1 through 4. And again, this webinar is about steps 5 through 8. And the first webinar was basically about choosing your topic. And you can view and listen to those webinars on the website if you go to webinars.knowledge.marketing. If you do attend all 4 webinars or listen to all 4 webinars, you will be fully equipped to design and execute and measure and produce your own lead generating webinars. These webinars are built around educational topics, and it's been my experience that educational-based webinars can outperform a product-based webinar as much as 50 to 1. That's what we're going to teach you in this series, and we hope you can get those same results. This webinar is produced and sponsored by Knowledge Marketing for Industry, or KMI. Speaking today, my name is Bruce McDuffie. I'm the Principal Consultant for KMI with 20 plus years of experience in sales and marketing in the manufacturing sector. And one thing I've learned, especially in the last several years, is that educational-based marketing or educational-based content far outperforms product-based content. And that's why we build these webinars around the education and not the product. Dan Levy is your co-presenter today. Dan has worked as a marketing strategist and a content developer for 25 plus years in all kinds of industries, and these days he's focusing on manufacturing companies and helping them find their story and tell it so it engages with that target audience. How are you doing today, Dan?
Hey, I'm doing great. Hey, everybody. Thanks for making time for us today. Really appreciate it.
Great. And Dan, let's go ahead and kick it off with the basic housekeeping rules.
Absolutely. Housekeeping, always important to kick off a webinar talking about the housekeeping. About every webinar I've ever been to talks about some of these key points. Will we get a copy of the recorded webinar? Can I ask questions? Will we be able to get a copy of the slides? There may be some other housekeeping points as well that are critical to a webinar. And as I've said in the past, and I know I'm sounding like kind of a one-trick pony when this slide comes up, but these housekeeping elements are very important to include. Not only are they a great service and convenience for your attendees relative to those who want to view recordings, maybe suggest others do it, maybe they want to get a copy of your slides because you made a couple of key points that they really want to make sure that they hang on to, and even the ability to ask questions. And throughout the webinar, which we want you and encourage you to do today. Please use the box there, the chat window down below in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We'd love to get your questions. But not only are those, as I mentioned before, great conveniences for your attendees, but they are terrific vital signs, measurement tools for your webinar. Because as we'll talk about coming up here, I believe it's in step 8, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the measurement of the ability to measure and the ability to measure against very specific goals that you have are important. But recorded webinars, how many people went to your recorded webinar a week, 2 weeks, 2 months afterwards is a key measurement. Can you ask questions? Not only the quantity of the questions, but the quality of the questions that come in can be very, very instructive and informative, not only during your webinar, but after your webinar. A lot of times great questions can motivate and inspire great webinars on down the road. And then a copy of the slides, same thing. Who downloaded them? When did they download them? How can we get in touch with those people because we know they've got interest? So we'll get into that later into step 8. But just so that I'm clear, the answer to all 3 of those questions, can you get a recording? Can you ask questions? Will you be able to get a copy of the slides? The answer to all 3 of those is an emphatic yes. So, Bruce, I had mentioned step 8, and I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but why don't you take us through the agenda, and we'll get going.
Okay, thanks, Dan. The 4 steps that we will cover today are step number 5, the promotion plan. We'll talk about the promotion plan for the live event, for the on-demand event. You have 2 separate plans, and considering the outbound and the inbound channels. Promotion will be a very important part of the success of your webinar. Step number 6, we'll talk about the actual live broadcast, how to make it more interesting and more engaging, some tips and tricks on how to keep it from just being boring, frankly. Step 7, we'll talk about the promotion after the fact, after the live broadcast, very critical component, which is often overlooked. We'll give you some ideas and tips on how to promote your recorded version. And finally, step number 8, the metrics. Your webinar will survive or die based on metrics, and especially if you're asking for budget to support it. So we'll talk about some easy KPIs and some more difficult revenue KPIs. That's what we'll shoot to cover in the next hour or so. Takeaways: by the end of this webinar, we'd like you to be able to have these things to take back to your office. Dan?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite parts, especially as an attendee, but even as a presenter, because in the next 45 to 60 minutes, these are the areas where you're going to be more confident, more knowledgeable, where you're going to feel better about moving forward and bringing more value to your career, your marketing department, your organization. So that's I always love going over these because, so the first one, for example, learn how to plan webinar promotion for maximum engagement. We've spent some time in the previous webinars talking about how to come up with a really great topic. And if you haven't seen those, go get the recordings and watch those, or go get the slides, because it's so important to come up with a great topic. But if you don't promote that great topic and nobody hears about it, then how great is it really? You've got to sort of combine that promotion and make sure that you pull people in and let them know that you want to help them. Let them know that you want to provide value for them. If they know that, they'll show up. Key points for maximum effectiveness during the live broadcast. Boy, we've got some great tips there. And we really, it's so important that when you have this conversation with people that you really keep them engaged and focused, because it's so easy to just, hang up or think, I'll get the recording later or whatever. So we really want to hold people, and we'll give you some tips on that. Most effective tactics for engagement after the live broadcast. I like to say the webinar is really just the beginning, and we'll take you through some of those reasons why. And the fact that to not follow up is in a sense to lose a lot of your audience and not get the value of the work, because it does work. Webinars do take work to put on. There's no doubt about that. And then finally, the KPIs, the key performance indicators for measuring ROI and effectiveness. I think one of the great things about webinars and even content and digital marketing in general is, there's that old saw out there that says, I know half of my marketing budget is effective. I just don't know which half. Well, that's no longer true with digital marketing, and especially with webinars. You can measure it in so many ways that you'll be able to know. In some cases, immediately following the event, within minutes, you can start to pull up data and know how you did. And it's just so important. And so we want to talk about a little bit of that as well. But before we do that, Bruce, we've talked about steps 5 through 8, which we really want to hit today. But would you take a minute and just kind of maybe let's refresh everyone's memory on what steps 1 through 4 are as kind of a platform maybe to launch into step 5?
Sure. Good idea. The first 4 steps that we covered in the last webinar were step number 1, to collaborate with your stakeholders. And this is where you cover the fundamentals like you do with any marketing activity, the objective, how will you know you're successful, the KPIs. This is where you talk about resources and budget and so on. Step number 2, you're going to create your topic. And we talked about the topic extensively in the first webinar, and how to choose a topic that the audience cares about and what's in it for them. Step number 3 is building your team. We talked about how to find people to be experts and to be speakers, and how to make sure you get a commitment from those folks, and also not to forget about the people behind the scenes. There's a lot of support people who make these webinars happen and effective. And step number 4 is to choose the tools. You need to have some tools to be successful. For example, a webinar broadcasting tool, and maybe a CRM and a marketing automation platform. We talked about that. So if you're interested in learning and you didn't make the last webinar, go to webinars.knowledge.marketing, and there's a link to the recording, and there's a link to the slides. And there's also links for, if you have questions, you can email me and give me a phone call. Always happy to talk. So let's get into it. Step number 5, promotion. You got to tell people about your webinar series. Seems an obvious point, but sometimes people don't think about it. Promotion behind the topic. Promotion is the number 2 thing that can make or break the success of your webinar. You have to tell people about it, and you have to tell them about it in the right way. Of course, you have your channels, your outbound channels, which are mostly paid, your inbound channels, which some of them are free and some are paid. And you need to spend effort and time and money so that you let people know, the people in your target audience, you let them know about how you're going to benefit them with these webinars. And overall, your promotion should really support your marketing, your overall marketing plan. So pull out that marketing plan that you wrote and have ready to reference, and make sure that your webinar tactic ties in with those strategy that you're going for. Inbound and outbound channels, use them both. And in both channels, it's important to make it easy for people to engage. So you want to make it easy for them to learn more. So if you put a short ad out in a digital platform, or you do a print ad, or whatever you do for your outbound and your inbound, make it easy with one click, find out everything they need to know. And the message has to be clear about what's in it for them. Because picture it where somebody's going to get your email invitation or see your ad about your webinar series. Put yourself in their seat. You look at this and you immediately assess, is this worth my time? What's in it for me? Why do I care? So you have to answer that question succinctly and clearly, and make sure that you answer that question for the receiver of your message. And then once they do, and you've engaged them and they think, yeah, this is worth my time, I want to be in on this webinar, make it really easy for them to go from the message out to the registration. If you make it hard, they won't do it. So make it easy with easy registration, intuitive, and so on. Those are some fundamental things to think about for your inbound and your outbound messaging. Just to put a finer point on it, make sure that your message tells the reader in your target audience what's in it for them. And this is a slide we took from the first webinar, where you find that sweet spot. The sweet spot is the intersection of the pain or the passion of your target audience intersecting with the expertise of your firm. That's the sweet spot. That's where you want to build your topic around, and that's what your message should address. Don't address your company, don't address your product. These aren't about products anyways. Don't address trying to tell them why they should pay attention from your perspective. Tell them why they should pay attention from their perspective. What's in it for me? With them. Think that. As you're promoting, the best place you're going to find to get engagement is with your house list, your in-house database. And I've seen companies get 1,000 to 2,000 people to register just from one email invitation. So send an email invitation to your house list, your internal database. Maybe you send the email a couple of times. A good practice is to send the first email invitation to your database. Then a few days later or a week later, send an invitation to everybody who didn't open or perhaps didn't click on that email. You could hit them 2 or 3 times without being annoying. And it's not annoying if you prepare this webinar like we teach you to make it to benefit them. then they're not so annoyed when they get that email and they see it a couple of times because it's a benefit. It's not a promotional about the product. Automate the process. If you've got a marketing automation program in place, like a Marketo or Eloqua, something like that, automate it. You can be a lot more efficient. You can set up the automated emails, the filters and everything, so they just crank out there.
Hey, Bruce, before you go on, can I jump in with just a quick point on the previous slide there? I will tell you, I had a client, and I want to go back to your point about if you hit them a couple of times, you're not going to annoy them. I had a client I worked with who was very measured in the amount of times they were going to email their particular customers for that very reason. They didn't want to keep showing up in their inbox every day. We don't want to keep bugging them. And it was very eye-opening sitting in the meeting and saying, well, why do you think an email is bugging them? Well, it's product this, promotion that, sale this, follow up on that. And I said, well, really this email is really a gift to them. And you're offering them something of value if we're going to be true to what we are going to put in our content. And it was interesting how there was just that sort of uncomfortable silence in the room as I looked around the table and was watching everyone sort of process this notion that, oh, yeah, we're going to be giving them something. We're going to be offering them something, and all we're asking in return is that they show up. So suddenly the content marketing emails that we were getting ready to send out, the invitations to the webinar, were really sort of seen separately. They were kind of over in a different column on the spreadsheet in the calendar. And in fact, what we started doing was interspersing the sales-oriented emails with the content-oriented emails so that we were, giving them the gift of help and knowledge, 2 or 3 times. And then we might come in and ask for a sale or suggest a product promotion. So I think your point is a great one in that when you are reaching out to offer content, you're emailing somebody to give them a gift if you're following kind of some of the tenets that we've laid out here and that Bruce just even talked about on the previous slide. So I just think that's a really important point, and it's something that has not that a lot of people just aren't aware of, and it's sometimes very important to stick up your hand and say, wait a minute, we're trying to give them something. We're not trying to sell them something. And a lot of times that'll open up the idea that, oh, yeah, I guess we can reach out to them maybe more than we had prescribed before. So didn't want to hijack the discussion here, but I just think that's a really important point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different way of thinking. Then you evoke that influence of reciprocity, which is really important in all education and knowledge-based marketing really relies on that whole idea of reciprocity. I'm giving my target audience something they can use, something that matters to them. And in return, when the day comes and they're ready to buy, they come to you.
Yep.
Great, Dan. Thanks for pointing that out. So outbound promotions, you can do a press release. Press releases can get attention. You can, of course, use your social media channels. You could try some print ads, digital ads in your target publications. If your target audience goes to a certain association and visits their website and gets information about events and things, put an ad out there for them. Tell all of your distributors, your affiliates, your partners, your colleagues, tell everybody about it. And when you're telling them, don't just say we're doing a webinar series. Say we've got this webinar series designed to really help our people in our audience do this or be better at that or increase their passion, this hobby that they're passionate about. Don't just say we're doing a webinar, and let them know why and what's in it for the audience. Use the sales team as a channel. Sales team have a lot of contacts, and tell them about it and help them tell their prospects, their customers, people in the sales funnel. And these are all outbound promotions. Some you pay for, of course, some you don't, like the sales team, but get it out there. And you want to look at your audience. If you just go with your in-house database, that's a defined set. If one of your objectives is to bring new people in to your database or new people in to learn about your company, outbound is going to be more important. Inbound, put an ad or a notice right on the front page of your website. You've got hundreds, maybe you've got thousands of people a week visiting your site. Put it right out there. And again, don't just say new webinar series, say tell them why. New webinar series make you a better pilot or help you relieve this pain. Pay-per-click can be effective, optimized for search engines. Social media, I mentioned that in the outbound channels. It's also an inbound channel. As people share, you make it easy to share the information about the webinars. And make sure on the inbound, when they're going to probably come to a landing page, make sure, again, you make it easy, give them a quick story. Think about their perspective, your own perspective. What do I want to know about this? I want to know the topic, what's in it for me about the topic. I want to know about the speakers. Who are these people that are going to be speaking? I want to know what's in it for me. So answer those questions quickly, easily, make it easy to register from the landing page. So that's step number 5, promotion. You're going to promote the live event, and you're also going to promote the after live event. We'll talk about that later. But right now, while you're doing this live broadcast, Dan's going to give us some tips on how to make it more effective and engaging. Dan?
Absolutely, and it's important for and Bruce and I have talked about this sort of offline, and we'll bring it up now, and Bruce, feel free to jump in. We know that just in the few minutes that we've been talking to you, sort of setting up the webinar, going through step 5, now moving into step 6, we know you're getting emails. And we know that you've got phone calls coming in that are going to voicemail. And you probably have people walking by your office wondering, can they come in and bug you even though that they see that you're on the phone or that you're focusing in, listening to something on your computer. And maybe they've even gotten your attention. And you know what? That happens. But there are certainly things that you can do to minimize that. And we want to talk about some of those things because you're hosting an event. You're hosting a very informative and helpful conversation. And so we want to make sure that you are creating a high-energy event, a welcoming event, a fun event, an event that people feel like they're getting some value out of. And that means that in a lot of ways paying attention to the details. So one of the things I'm going to do and I'm going to try and I'm going to over-exaggerate a couple of things to make a point here. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this right here. And I'm going to use some of these tools that are available to me. And I'm sorry, that's a horrible highlighting. But one of the things before I get off this slide is I want to make sure that everybody sees that point. Above all, don't forget to record the live broadcast. And you might be thinking to yourself, I don't want to listen to this again. I'm here. I'm living it. I helped produce it. I've been to rehearsals. I know what it says. And that's okay, because the reason that you want to record the live broadcast is that not everybody's going to make it to your webinar. Even if they have said they'll be there, folks, for whatever reason, sometimes can't make it or have to tune out. And just how many folks, I'm going to leave that as a teaser for another slide coming up. So let's get into some additional topics and tools and ideas. And one of them is you will have these kind of motion tools, highlighters, check boxes, all those kinds of things, even erasers. So you can take your highlighting off if you want. Use those. Put those to work for you. So moving on, use 2 or more speakers. This webinar is very sort of foundational in what we're talking about here. It's not highly technical. There's not a lot of moving parts to it, and our message is pretty clear and straightforward. So, if you were going to be efficient, you could say, hey, we just need one guy to do this or just one voice. But I'm going to tell you, and again, I'm going to find my little arrow here so that I can, again, exaggerate my point a little bit here. 2 voices, 2 personalities, 2 perspectives, even sometimes 2 perspectives that don't exactly see eye to eye are always going to be more interesting than one. And that shift in tone, that shift in cadence, that shift in energy is going to be something that people will notice. If they're starting to tune out or they're going to email or whatever, you switch your speaker, people are going to be like, hey, wait a minute, something's changed here, and I need to pay attention to it. The second thing here, if you've got 2 speakers, you're thinking, well, I've got one topic, I've got one expert. That's okay. Bring somebody in who's got, as I've called it in the past, their inner game show host that wants to come out. let them moderate, let them tee up the expert. So, and it gives the expert a chance to collect his or her thoughts. You can frame questions or the discussion in a particular way, and to have that second person there, I think, to work in conjunction with an expert is really a great thing.
Hey Dan, can I make a point?
Heck yeah, please do.
So the point is that we're doing it right now. As I jump in and I give a perspective to what Dan's talking about, you can see two voices, different personality, different sound. It's an engagement tactic, and it works pretty well. We've probably all attended webinars where there's just one speaker with slides. It's hard to engage with that. But when we break it up, like Dan's saying, with two speakers, that's what I just did, and it can be an attention getter. Thanks, Dan.
Absolutely. No, that's perfect. And and what a way to jump in and make that point. That was awesome. We're always learning from Bruce. He is the master. But anyway, and speaking of that, kind of to that point, practice, that third point. In preparing even for this webinar that Bruce and I are hosting today, we have met on this particular webinar, we have met on it twice. We threw our ideas in together on the slides. Then we met, Bruce and I, over the phone, away from everybody else, and we did a walkthrough of every slide. What's the point? What are we going to say? How are we going to say it? And we go through that. Then we've met again, and we've actually done a live rehearsal where we went through word for word, slide by slide. We did the whole presentation where it was just the two of us. And we've even had cases where we've presented together where maybe the first rehearsal wasn't quite as sharp as it could be, and we've done a second rehearsal. So when we talk about practice, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but we do practice what we preach, pardon the pun, in that for this presentation, there's probably been 2.5 to 3.5 hours of prep time just to put this on, and that's what it takes. So it's very important. And the other thing about that practice is you hear it in your head, but then when you hear the words spoken, it sounds different, and you need to almost hear your speakers say the words, and they need to hear themselves say the words. And then the other thing, too, that's great about rehearsals is you really get to hone your points. Bruce and I will critique each other and say, hey, you might have gone a little bit long on that slide, or, hey, spend a little bit more time on this point. It's important. You can't get that unless you practice. So that's kind of enough on the speakers. Let's move on and talk about interaction a little bit. Interactive features are incredibly important because that's how you pull your audience and you move them from sort of a passive listener who may also be checking emails, may also be proofreading a report, maybe more interested in the lunch they're eating at their desk than what they're hearing through their computer. And so we want to make sure, and some webinar platforms allow these tools even to be used in recording, so double check whoever your provider is, but surveys, polls, chats, quizzes, anything that you can do to pull people in, to have them provide an opinion, a thought, a question, anything along those lines is going to be good because it not only gives you as the webinar host and producer a gauge of who you're talking to and what their interests are, but it gives all of the attendees a chance to kind of check in with each other a little bit, if you will. If a survey comes up and you want to say, hey, how many people are we talking to today that have 20-plus years experience? How many people have 10 to 15 years? How many people have 5 to 10 years? And everybody fills out their particular answer. Those results then come up on the screen, and for a moment there, the attendees are looking at each other going, oh, this is the group that I'm part of. Or if there's a quiz and everybody fills out an answer, you want to check yourself. Did I fill out the right answer, first of all, and how many other people got it right, got it wrong? Or if there are questions about maybe the maturity of content marketing or so, how do you feel you are on a scale, like a maturity scale? You can find out I'm with a group that's very mature, or maybe I'm more mature than the group that I'm with. So it's a fantastic way to pull people in and let them sort of check in with each other. Next point here, let me get my pointer back out here so that we can continue to make this point about being memorable and being engaging. Be unconventional. I was at a webinar one time where there was a survey question up even before the webinar started that just said, how's the weather where you are? And it was interesting to sit back and watch how many people filled it out, how many people started talking to each other about the weather around the world. We had people in the U.S., Europe, Australia. They were comparing notes on the weather. Well, that certainly had them engaged even before the webinar started. They were already communicating with each other. They were already learning about each other. They were already connecting and bonding. So I thought that was a terrific, very unconventional way to start a webinar. Other times I've seen, and Bruce and I certainly could have done it. We didn't, but we certainly could have opened with a question, a challenge to the group. Are you ready to be better? Are you ready to, 60 minutes from now, be more confident about moving forward with your webinars? We can certainly do that. We feel like we've got enough engagement along the way that we didn't need to, but you certainly can do that. The next one, mix up the question and answer sessions. Again, Bruce and I feel like we're rolling along pretty well here. We've gotten some pretty good feedback, so we are not necessarily going to apply a Q&A session in the middle of a webinar, but if you've got a section that feels like it's going on too long, throw a Q&A in the middle of it just to kind of break up the discussion a little bit, and you can put them throughout at strategic points, or if you've made a specific point that you want to make sure sticks, pose a question to the audience, let them answer through the chat window. These last two, I'm going to kind of roll together. Avoid opening up the phone lines for live Q&A and be wary of the live video feed. Really, because for really two reasons. And let me use the highlighter here because I'm just now having fun with these toys. Two reasons for that. Probably the primary one is that technology is not quite there yet, where if you do open up the phone lines and let people actually ask their questions over the phone, a lot of times the technology isn't there so that the person who's asking the question is not crisp and clean, clear, easily understood by everyone else attending the webinar, and that can start to derail. People can get distracted and confused because they maybe can't hear so well. So that can be a point. Same thing with the live video feed. You could have everything set up perfectly so that people could, use a Google Chat or a Skype or something or even the web platform tool to actually ask their questions live. And you could have everything set up on your end, but a lot of folks on the receiving end, their modems aren't quite set up there. They don't have the high-speed internet. They don't have the bandwidth, I guess is the word I'm really looking for, to be able to receive that video and have that make sense and be clear. So the technology isn't quite there yet for live phone lines or live video feed. The other thing that can be a little unnerving is sometimes it can be hard to control people if they've got very specific questions and they want very specific answers to, which is great, but that's certainly something you can take offline and you can answer through your chat window or your questions. You can get back to them through email or even call them if they've got something they want to talk about. But sometimes those questions can be so specific that while it's great for the one person who's calling in and you want to talk to them about that, you've in a sense alienated, the other 99.9% of the folks because that issue doesn't pertain to them. So that helps you keep things broad and valuable to the broadest possible audience. So there we go on the interactive features. Very important to pull people in. And then finally, some other tips. Practice. We cannot emphasize this hard enough. Send 2 or 3 email reminders to people. And again, it's about reinforcing the value. It's about saying, hey, we want to give you this gift of knowledge, and we want to give you skills or abilities or insights or perspectives. So please show up. Please come and join us in this conversation. So we've kind of hit that point earlier. I won't exaggerate it too much. But expect around 30% of registrants to attend. Somewhere between 30 and 40% is what you're going to hit. So that goes back to that first point on the first slide of this section, remember to record, and why that is so important, because 60 to 70% of the people who didn't attend were still interested. They still put their hand up and said, hey, I want to be there. I want to be part of it, and for whatever reason they couldn't. And a lot of those folks are going to want that recording afterwards, and you're going to send them an email. You're going to make it very easy for them to say, hey, here's a link to the recording. And you'll be surprised by the number of people who will go and listen to the recording. So the recording is about them, and it's about, even though they weren't able to attend the live event, they're still able to be part of the webinar. They're still able to experience the value, and they're still able to connect with you, and that's what you really want. That's what it's all about. And we got 3 points here: practice, practice, practice. So I put a little extra bullet next to each one of those. So for the first one, Let me get my little arrow here because I'm starting to have fun with that now. The first practice is really about, again, it's different in your head than it is when you actually say the words. So it's important to hear those words and make sure you do this. The next practice, again, what makes that so important is it gives you a chance to sharpen what you want to say. It gives you a chance to really understand which words are clutter and which words are valuable. It really gives you a chance to really sharpen that point. And then the third practice, which to me is probably the most important, the more you practice, the more confident you're going to feel about the webinar, the more fun you're going to have. The more fun you have as a presenter, the more energy that's going to come through, and the more energy you can get through the phone lines and through the slides you put together, the more fun everybody's going to have. So you want to have fun. You want to have a great event. You want to provide value. You want to build your brand and move prospects through either into and or through the sales funnel that Bruce and I have shown you in the last couple of webinars. And, these are some ways to make sure that we do that. And again, it's a point we've made time and time again, but let's get into some specifics. Just because your webinar is over, just because you've hung up the phone and everybody has signed off, that is not the end at all. In fact, I like to say that a lot of times the webinar is really just the beginning. So I'm going to shut up now, take a breath. I'm going to give you a different perspective, a different voice, a different level of energy, and ask Bruce to pick it up and go from here.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Good tips. Yeah, the live broadcast, there's a lot of tips and tricks that Dan just talked about to get interest. And it'll depend on your particular situation, but try them and test them. When I did some webinars in the past, I tried opening up the phone lines and having some live questions. Didn't work. I don't want to say it was a disaster, but it was pretty bad. So I learned. I tested it and I learned. So you may want to try testing something without having it, be terrible, but testing is okay.
You bet.
Okay. Step 7, post-webinar. We've been talking about this already. This is often a neglected step because the tendency is to prepare for the webinar. You practice, like Dan says, and you prepare the material. You do everything right, and then the big day arrives. And you do your broadcast, and you got several hundred people signed on, and there's interaction, and it really went great. The tendency is, got that done, it was great, we're done. But as Dan mentioned, you're not done. You're really going to mine the gold of your webinar, your educational webinar, after the fact. You're going to really get most of your engagement after the live broadcast, believe it or not. And that's because, as Dan mentioned, only 30 to 40% of people are going to show up to a webinar. Because let's face it, it's easy to blow off a webinar. You read the invitation, you register, you're excited, put it on your calendar. The day comes along and your boss comes in and says, hey, I need you to come into this meeting, or I need you to come into my office, or something else comes up. It's easy to not attend. That's why the numbers are so high. So don't ignore those no-shows. If you do ignore them, it's a high cost. It's a high cost because you're really wasting a lot of your energy and your resources and your budget by not reaching out to the people who don't show up. But also follow up with the people who did come. People are going to want to know. They're going to want to review that webinar again. If you did a good job, provided good information, they're going to want to have that as a reference. So send them a link to the recording. Don't just assume that because they attended the live event that they're all set. Send your follow-up email with a link to the recording and a link to the slides at least within 24 hours. The sooner the better, because people are distracted. We're all hit with a bunch of different tasks and events and emails and things we got to do. The sooner you can follow up after the live event, the better off you'll be as far as engagement goes. Engage, as Jean-Luc Picard would say. Engagement is what it's all about. You get some engagement with your promotion. You certainly get engagement with the live broadcast for people who attend. Continue to engage, especially the no-shows, people who attended, maybe the entire audience. You can promote the recorded version to everybody again. in your database. You can use it as a promotion tool for additional outbound campaigns. Use the content to engage, and engagement means people get to know your company. They get to start to see the value. By doing any type of educational marketing, you're establishing two things: a credibility. People in your target audience are going to believe this company knows what they're talking about. They're credible. They're not just pushing their products. And the other thing you're going to get is your top of mind awareness. People who attend this webinar, when they attend the webinar, or when they register, or when they see the invitation, 90% plus aren't ready to buy your stuff when they see that message. But by helping them with something that bothers them, or a pain or a passion, you get that engagement. So what happens is, when the day does come along and they're ready to buy this thing that you're selling, you're first company they think about. And you already have credibility. So you already have a big leg up on the competition who's not doing this. And that's why engagement is so important. Email follow-up is a must. You may have a sales team that wants to call every person who registered for the webinar. That's a decision you'll have to make with your sales team, but it's a possible engagement tactic. Add them to another nurturing program. If you get some good educational content, give them more. I wouldn't say nurture on the product at this stage, but nurture on more education. Help them with that pain. Help them with that passion. Certainly invite everybody to the next webinar and send other related education. For example, with this webinar, we have the 8-step framework in a document. We have the webinar checklist in a spreadsheet. And this is additional information that we send out to people who attend and register and show interest. So continue to engage. It's important to debrief the team. Again, the tendency is to think relief. Whew, we got that one done. It was great. We're all great. No, that's where it just starts. Debrief what went well, what could have gone better. Get authentic and safe. Make it an authentic and safe environment for people to share true feedback. If somebody in the group thinks something didn't go well, they're going to have a perspective that you should listen to. So don't just encourage positive feedback. Encourage all types of feedback. And then revise if you have to. Do something different. Change the audio. Change the presentation tool. Make adjustments as needed. Let the team know how great they are. Let them know they're appreciated. A very underused leadership influence tactic. I don't want to call it a tactic, but it's important to let your people know they're appreciated. Everyone's doing the best they can. They want to be appreciated, especially people that aren't on the marketing team. They're taking time out of their regular job to help promote this offering and this education. Let them know, hey, you guys are great. You guys are awesome. We love you. Let's keep going. Okay, that's step 7, post-webinar. Very important for the success of your webinar. But success, how do you know you were successful? Well, you should have established some objectives, some goals, and perhaps even some key performance indicators in step 1, where you collaborate with your stakeholders and you set the fundamentals. But you have to have some way to measure it, because you want to tell people. You want to tell people, especially if you're trying to get more budget or more resources, you want to tell people about the success. Let them know what worked. If you got 2,500 people to attend your webinar, that's a great metric. And that's a natural metric from webinars. That's why I like webinars as a pilot program. Sometimes manufacturing companies, as a matter of fact, many times manufacturing companies trying to stand up this concept of let's educate people about something that matters to them, and let's not talk about the products. It's a huge culture shift in most manufacturing companies. Webinars are a great pilot tactic to prove out that concept, because you've got those numbers. You've got the registrant numbers. You've got the percent of registrants who attended. I'm going to take Dan's advice here. I'm going to use these arrows for an engagement tactic.
All right, Bruce, way to go.
That's right. Practice what we preach. So you've got the metrics that you can look at, or KPIs, that are natural with most webinar platforms. Of course, the registrants, the percent of registrants who actually attend, and again, this is typically 30-40%. If you get 50% plus to attend your webinar, the live event, you did very well, very well. How long did people attend? Once they sign on to the webinar, did they stick around? And most webinar platforms give you an actual time for each person who attended. How many times was the recording played? This goes right to the post-webinar, step number 7. How many times was that recording accessed and played? And then look at your survey questions. Your survey questions will give you some, if you did them right and you ask insightful questions, they'll give you an idea of engagement, and they'll also give you some good marketing information. If you ask your target audience about the biggest challenges they have around this topic, that can be very valuable, maybe for another webinar series, or maybe for another marketing campaign. So those are easy ones, really.
Hey, Bruce, before we jump off this slide, I want to throw one other point in if I can.
Sure.
Every one of these points that you've just gone over are great for providing data. And data is key. I mean, that's, I think it was Warren Buffett who said accounting is the language of business. And certainly the data that you can pull from a webinar is certainly going to become the critical language of content marketing and certainly webinar success. But to that last point, and you took your arrows off here, so I'm gonna go back into this survey questions right here. You're going to want to ask questions about, how did you feel the speaker's knowledge was? Rank them 1 to 5. How did you feel, the overall presentation was? Give it a ranking and give us some data, give us some numbers to chew on, which is fantastic. But there's another part of it that I've also found has been very important when I have done post-webinar reporting. And I've done reports that have just gone to my client, or my client and the marketing leadership, or even my client contact the marketing leadership, and even up into the C-suite. They want to know how it works. There's another aspect to kind of help frame and give the data a little bit of an emotional perspective, if you will. And that is to make sure to always ask that question at the end about general comments, or even as maybe a part B to some of the questions you ask. Ask for some comments along the way. You don't want to ask for a ton, because then it becomes cumbersome for people to fill out. They've already given you an hour. They're feeling good about what you've told them. They want to feed back to you, but we don't want to make the survey instrument too cumbersome. But definitely leave a couple of spaces in your survey to get some comments, because in addition to reporting the data, I always like to report on what was the sentiment of the attendees. How are they feeling? And that will come through in the comment section. So you can certainly provide a lot of data and a lot of numbers that people are going to want to grab onto, and that's certainly going to tell you something. But when you can put a sentiment with it, or if you can pull a couple of key comments out and put them into your reporting that provide that sort of personal perspective, it really gives you a much fuller picture, and it really helps bring those numbers to life when you can put those comments from your attendees along with the data that you're getting. So again, data is super important. I'm not downplaying that at all, but when you can add that extra element of sentiment to the data to help support it, I've always found that those reports and the recommendations that come from those reports always seem to be much more well received and understood. So I wanted to throw that out, and thank you for allowing me to do that.
Sure. Good points. Great points. The last key performance indicator area is revenue. This is a more challenging metric. It's harder to show how the webinar series, or how any marketing tactic actually contributed to revenue. You've got to have some tools in place. You've got to have things like a marketing automation platform synchronized with a CRM, customer relationship management program. That's more complex, and a lot of companies, especially manufacturing, don't have that technology in place yet. However, if you can get these metrics, they're very powerful with the executive suite. If you're trying to change the culture of marketing from product focus to education focus, And you can show that an education-focused webinar contributed to several $1 million or whatever the number is in created opportunities in the sales funnel. Very powerful. Your CEO might come by one day and say, hey, how'd the webinars go? And you can say, yeah, we had 1,200 people sign up. CEO is going to say, hey, that's great. That's really, really great. But if you say, we have 1,200 people show up and we've contributed to more than $5 million in new opportunities created because of these webinars, bang, you've got his attention. And you've got his support for this type of marketing. That's why revenue metrics are so powerful. Your metrics could be contribution to new opportunities, contribution to closed and won opportunities or revenue. You can show how marketing influenced revenue, or your webinar series influences revenue. You can attribute with different models how the webinar contributed to actual dollar amounts. You can use webinar as a lead source. So if you're going for more people, newer people into the database, give the lead source as webinar, you can tie that lead source to, again, opportunities created or won. You get a metric that way. Maybe your metric is the sales team got X amount of sales calls because of this webinar series. These are revenue-based metrics, harder to get, but much, much more powerful. Okay, that is the steps 5, 6, 7, and 8. Dan, do we have some questions in the queue?
We do. And looking at my watch here, we're about, I think we're roughly 50 minutes into it or so. So I'm going to take these, some ideas here, and I'm going to group them into, I think there are sort of 3 themes that came out. There's another group of questions here. If we've got a minute, I'll put it to the end, which just kind of made me smile. But hey, I think the first sort of key area that I want to address really goes back to the slide that you had just talked about, and this idea of revenue. We're generating leads. We're working with the sales team. We're really interested in connecting the results we got from our webinar to the bottom line revenues. Well, they aren't bottom line revenues, but the revenues certainly. Would you take a moment and talk just a little bit more about the agreement that marketing and sales should have as a result of maybe a webinar or a webinar series put together? Is it a nice to have? Is it a need to have? And how might some folks go about approaching sales to say, hey, we'd really love your partnership with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sales is not really going to be interested in it at first because it's not handing them business from their perspective at first. So when you're first starting talking about webinars, you talk about the engagement, you talk about top-of-mind awareness, you talk about credibility and how it's going to feed the sales funnel. Sales guys want to see it in the funnel. So they might say, let's see how it goes, and they're not really going to put a lot of effort into follow-up in most cases, unless you have a really strong sales director. But in most cases, they're not. So what you have to do is, assuming you have the tools in place, the marketing automation platform and the CRM system that are synchronized, you put little tags in the activity. So you automatically tag an attendee with the lead source, for example. Or you create campaigns in the CRM and you tie everybody who attended into the campaign. So the sales team doesn't even really know or care that you've got these tags in place. But what happens is when a salesperson does create an opportunity for somebody with a tag, it's linking your webinar series to the revenue again. So you can put things in place like that to get automatic attribution, and the sales team doesn't even have to know. Once you get some traction and the sales team starts seeing some activity, then they're going to be more interested. Not all of them, but some of them will get interested, and they may want to do some follow-up. They may want to even participate in the webinar. Caution there, because they're thinking, I can promote my product.
Mm-hmm.
So caution there. But some may actually want to do a follow-up. Maybe one of the sales salespeople says, hey, this was a great webinar. Can you do a follow-up email to my territory about the webinar? And then you can set up an email that actually looks like it's from the salesperson to everyone in his territory, where he's offering that gift to his prospects. Hey, we just did this webinar. I was thinking about you and how this might benefit you. Here's a link to the recording. You can set things up like that. So it's really, I guess, the initiative that comes from the marketing side versus the sales side. Did that answer the question, Dan?
Yeah, I think so, and I think one of the key points I heard in there, not to double back on what you've already said, but one of the key points is make sure you get those tags in there so that when the day comes when you do want to stand up and you do want to talk about revenue, you've done your homework ahead of time, you've got those tags in there so you can circle back and point to and say, this is how we contributed to the bottom line, which is really terrific. Another topic of interest that has come up, and really this in a sense goes all the way back to the first webinar in this series, but especially in this webinar, Bruce, you and I have been pretty clear that we feel that webinars are worth the time and effort and the work to put into them to do them well. And clearly I think we both agree with that. But I think in really laying out the work that needs to be done and then juxtaposing that against the fact that only 30% of the people who said they were going to attend, not 30% of the entire audience that you marketed to, but just 30% of the people who put their hand up and said, yeah, I'll be there, ultimately are only the ones who show up. That just feels like a lot of work and a lot of, selling internally and all this to only have, 30% of the people show up. And it just feels like I'm getting a sense that there's a little bit of a hard time juxtaposing the effort versus the attendance. And I'm wondering if you would just maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. You definitely don't want the emotion of futility to creep in there because it can. But the answer goes back to step number 7, post-webinar promotion and post-webinar engagement. This is where you can mine that gold. And if you ignore that section that don't show up, your webinar metrics aren't going to be so good. If the only metric you can show is we had 100 people show up and we had 400 people register, not very compelling. Executive team may say, I don't know how good that is if you only got 1 out of 4 people to show up. So that's why you take it further. The post-webinar is critically important to engage with those people because they've shown an interest. They've raised their hand and say, hey, this is interesting to me. This is an issue that I face that I want to learn more about. You don't want to leave them hanging out there because they'll forget about you. If you don't engage with them after the webinar, they've pretty much said, hey, I am a prospect. One day I could buy from you, and if you can really help me out, I will buy from you. That's really what they're saying. So if you don't pay attention with a follow-up email and further engagement and the post-webinar step 7, they will forget about you. And if your competitor steps in, listens to these KMI webinars, and your competitor does it, then they're going to get the business, and you're not. So 30% is expected to be 30 to 40%. I've even done webinars where it's been 20%. Expect that, but pay attention to those no-shows. Pay attention to them. And leverage your content. Use that content. You put a lot of effort into creating this content for the webinar. Use it again. Use it for a white paper. Use it for an application note. Use it for an FAQ. Use it for other stuff. So you can, again, leverage and scale that effort you put into the content.
Excellent. And hey, just looking at the clock here, I think I want to just squeak one more question in here very quickly before we wrap up. I want to be respectful of the hour, but talk about the value of outbound promotion versus inbound promotion. I know that we've talked in the past that, hey, if you're a little resource strapped, it certainly feels like inbound promotion, it may be a place to lean because you do have an in-house list that you don't have to pay for. Social media posts you don't necessarily have to buy versus outbound where you may buy a marketing list, you may buy some ads somewhere. Talk a little bit about those two. Can you do one or the other, or should we really try to hit a balance there?
Well, it goes back to step number 1 when you're discussing your goals and objectives. If one of your objectives is to bring new people into your database and engage with a broader part of your target audience, then outbound is going to be more important. And it's going to be more important because you have to pay to reach these people in different audiences. If it's not that important to bring new people in, and maybe you just want to revitalize interest with your existing database, maybe all you need to do is an email to your database. That may be enough to get you enough interest to satisfy your goals. So look at your goals and objectives and let that drive what you do for promotion. We went over in step number 5, we went over different ways you could promote. You don't have to do every one of those. Depends again on what you're going to do. Sometimes folks will send out an email, maybe do an external promotion, see how it does. And if they don't get enough interest, you tweak your message, maybe you tweak your topic, and you go again. And you add something. For example, instead of just an email promotion invitation, pick another audience and put an ad out on the website, or find an audience or a venue who will send an email on your behalf. So you kind of play it by ear. So you play it by ear and you look at your objectives and you choose based on those things.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, there's certainly other topics, other things. We could probably go on for another half hour about this, but I think to really try and bring this in as close to an hour as possible, those are probably the questions we ought to take for now. And okay. Why don't we make just a few closing points, and we'll let people get on with their day.
Okay, sounds good, Dan. Those are good questions. I always wrap up with this slide, and Albert Einstein's famous quote, and the quote, I'm going to say it: insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If you're like typical manufacturing companies, growth is hard to come by, and you are maybe getting 1% to 3%. Maybe you're just trying to hold on to market share, and you're launching new products, you get your sales team out on the street, and so on, and that's just not working. Do something different. Do something different to get better results. Something different could be these educational webinars. Why not? Give it a try, see what happens. I guarantee you, if you do it like we're showing you here in these webinars, it will work. You'll have amazing numbers to share with your executive team. Okay, we covered the 4 steps: promotion plan, the live broadcast, the post-webinar promotion, and the KPIs. You can download the 8-step framework. It's a PDF document at this URL on the screen. Or you can go to knowledgemarketing.com and search in the how-to section, and they're all listed there. Takeaways today. Let's see if, Dan, how did we hit on the takeaways?
Hey, I think we did a pretty good job, actually. The first one here, learn how to plan webinar promotion for maximum engagement. In fact, we hit that even again in the Q&A. Think about the goals of your webinar. Think about the markets, the audiences you're trying to reach. Think about the content that you're offering, and then determine, is inbound or outbound the best way to go? Which tactics will get you the most effective response? So I think that's really the key to step 5, and we did a nice job there. Key points for maximum effectiveness during the live broadcast: practice, practice, practice. Bring a couple of speakers in, use your on-screen tools, have fun. And so really step number 6 was covered off there. Number 3 was really covered in step number 7, the most effective tactics for engagement after the live broadcast. Boy, if nothing else, remember 30 to 40% of your folks are going to show up to your actual live event. That means 60 to 70% of those people who, as Bruce has pointed out, put their hand up, said, hey, I could be a prospect with you someday. This is interesting to me. Make sure you're giving them as many opportunities as possible, as much follow-up as possible, so that you can maximize the effectiveness of your effort. And then finally, the KPIs, the key performance indicators. So many different goals, so many different ways to measure, to make sure that not only what you're doing met the goals that you set for that webinar, but give you a nice way to report that up and into the business, into the sales team, into the marketing leadership, into the business leadership, but also give you a nice insight into how we can get better, how we can always be improving, because we think that's just so important to be able to not only build on success but create more of it for next time. So I don't want to hurt myself or patting us on the back, Bruce, but I think we did a pretty good job with these takeaways.
Okay, good. I'm just going to wrap up these last few slides quickly. So next webinar, February 19th, we're going to talk about the conversion process, more about in-depth how you convert your attendees and registrants to revenue. And if you like the way this sounds and you want more information, you can go to the Knowledge Marketing for Industry website, give me a call, shoot me an email. Would love to hear from you and hear how your webinars are going or brainstorm how you want to do them. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for showing up today. Thanks, Dan, for participating, and hope we see everyone on the next one.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.